ZaSu Pitts became a renowned character actress, beginning in the teens and working consistently through the early 1960s. She developed distinctive and eccentric affections that endeared her to audiences but limited the roles she could play. Behind her screen personality was a complicated woman whose life reflected the roller coaster that was Hollywood. Like so many featured American players, she has been occasionally forgotten, but we know Mary Pickford and Frances Marion and Barbara La Marr were important in putting her on her path. This is part of her story. Born in Kansas on January 3, 1894, ZaSu was named after her father's two sisters, Eliza and Susan. To satisfy competing family interests, she was named with both of their names in her own name. It has been incorrectly spelled as ZaSu Pitts in some film critics and news articles. Although the name is commonly mispronounced ZaSu or ZaSu, in her 1963 book Candy Hits, published the year of her death, the actress gave the correct pronunciation as ZaSu, recounting that Mary Pickford had predicted many will mispronounce it, and adding how right she was. However, when introducing herself on the September 4th, 1952 episode of I've Got a Secret, she herself pronounced it as ZaSu. Her comedy series partner Thelma Todd also clearly addresses her as ZaSu in the hospital room scene of Adam and Eve in 1932. ZaSu was 5 or 14, depending on which birth year you use, when her Civil War veteran father died. He had lost a leg while serving in the 76th New York Infantry in the Civil War, and her mother decided to move ZaSu, her two older brothers, and herself to Santa Cruz, a small beach town at the time on the northern California coast. Her childhood home at 208 Lincoln Street still stands. The address was an important one to the Pitts since Rulandus Pitts lost his leg in the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863, fighting for Lincoln's vision 1 year after enlisting in the Union Army. ZaSu attended Santa Cruz High School, where she participated in school theatricals. Her family ran a boarding house in Santa Cruz, but money was very tight, so ZaSu, like so many other young women at the time, left home to try her luck in the movies. She found small roles in a few short films when she went to nearby Pleasanton, where Mary Pickford was filming Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm. ZaSu was cast as an extra in the film and then followed the company back to Los Angeles when she was 22 years old. Frances Marion, American screenwriter, director, and journalist who thoroughly defeats the myth that women didn't work in Hollywood before feminism, was finishing the script for Mary Pickford's next film, A Little Princess, when a young man from the casting office called to say he was bringing over a maiden fairer than Aphrodite for her consideration. He walked in a few minutes later, escorting a thin, awkward young woman with enormous eyes, and Frances Marion's first reaction was to be reminded of a trapped little animal. But when the man said beauty like this should not go unnoticed, Frances threw him out and admonished the girl, now with tears in her eyes, to pay no attention to him. "Tell me about yourself," Frances said to her in an effort to make her comfortable, and without any evidence of self-pity, the visitor talked about her early childhood in Kansas, her father's early death, and the family's move to Santa Cruz. ZaSu had found some work with Universal, but had little luck at other studios. ZaSu told Frances that she had met D.W. Griffith, but he said she looked too much like Lillian Gish to be in any of his pictures. It was the nicest thing anyone had ever said to her, and indeed ZaSu does look like Lillian Gish. As Frances watched and listened, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and it occurred to her that audiences might be as touched as she was. There was a part in A Little Princess for a young maid called a slavey, and Frances went to Mary Pickford with the idea of casting ZaSu for this counterpart. When Mary heard the whole story, including the derogatory remarks, she approved immediately. Producer and director Mickey Nealon agreed that ZaSu was perfect for the part and records the following story in his memoirs. ZaSu must have become inspired by something because she did a couple of dramatic scenes that were wonderful. Mrs. Pickford, always alert to protect her little brood from any direction, whether it was Mary, Lottie, or Jack, Saw these scenes in the projection room when we were running her the daily rushes. Afterwards, as we were all walking back towards Mary's dressing room, she took me aside and said, "That girl is good, Mickey. In fact, she's too good. Now can't we just cut the scene out of the picture?" I thought it best to humor her, and I said, "Charlotte, Mary and I try in every way to get the best talent to play in these pictures, which goes to make good and sometimes great pictures. One bad actor or actress can sometimes throw this picture way off key, spoiling the entire illusion we are trying to create. But Mickey," she exploded, "she's stealing the picture." "Oh, nonsense," I replied. "She is supposed to dominate this scene to make the situation real and believable." Charlotte squared off, and her little hat slid down almost over her eye. "Now you listen to me, you stubborn Irish." A quiet voice, but carrying authority, intruded into our little argument. "Mother, Mickey is absolutely right, and tomorrow I'm going to ask him to make a close-up of ZaSu in this scene. She is simply marvelous, and people will see her and talk about her, but best of all they'll talk about my picture, which is what sells tickets." Mother Pickford, with the quick understanding of the Celt, quietly put her arm around my shoulder and said, "Well, what chance have I got between you two Irish larks?" Sell tickets? Well, come on, let's go home. We've got to take that added scene of that wonderful girl tomorrow." Mary Pickford gave me the knowing wink and led her mother gently away. ZaSu admitted years later she was influenced by her school teachers for her performances the most. When A Little Princess was released in November 1917, it was a huge success, and we see Hollywood lean into the childhood stories of the West until the 1940s. Moving Picture World was not the only one to make special mention of the actress playing the young slavey. "Watch ZaSu Pitts, for she is a coming star," they wrote. Still, Lasky did not put ZaSu under contract, and while she appeared in another Pickford film, How Could You, Jean?, she went on to play a variety of roles at different studios, mostly in comic one-reelers, before starring in Erich von Stroheim's Greed in 1924. ZaSu Pitts had hidden talents as a dramatic actress. She was given the greatest tragic role of her career in von Stroheim's 7.5-hour epic, Greed. The surprise casting initially shocked Hollywood, but showed that Pitts could draw tears with her doleful demeanor as well as laughs. Pitts played the center of a love triangle well and with extreme pathos. Having been extensively edited prior to release, the final theatrical cut ran just over 2 hours. The movie failed initially at the box office, but has since been restored to over 4 hours and is considered one of the greatest films ever made. Greed is an American silent psychological drama film written and directed by Erich von Stroheim and based on the 1899 Frank Norris novel McTeague. It stars Gibson Gowland as Dr. John McTeague, ZaSu Pitts as the long-suffering Trina Siepp, his wife, and Jean Hersholt as McTeague's friend and eventual enemy Marcus Schuler. The film tells the story of McTeague, a San Francisco dentist who marries his best friend's girlfriend. Greed was one of the few films of its time to be shot entirely on location, with von Stroheim shooting approximately 85 hours of footage before editing. 2 months alone were spent shooting in Death Valley for the film's final sequence, which ends in the desert, and many of the cast and crew became ill. Von Stroheim used sophisticated filming techniques such as deep focus cinematography and montage editing. He considered Greed to be a Greek tragedy in which environment and heredity controlled the characters' fates and reduced them to primitive human beasts. This flew in the face of the more modern noble savage credo. During editing, the production company merged into MGM, putting Irving Thalberg in charge of post-production. Thalberg had fired von Stroheim a few years earlier at Universal Pictures. Originally almost 8 hours long, Greed was edited against von Stroheim's wishes to about 2.5 hours, as Thalberg didn't buy into the greed is toxic, the pursuit of money is hurtful theme. Only 12 people saw the full-length 42-reel version, which is now lost. Some of them called it the greatest film ever made. Von Stroheim later called Greed his most fully realized work and was hurt both professionally and personally by the studio's re-editing of it. Based on her performance, von Stroheim labeled ZaSu Pitts the greatest dramatic actress. He also featured her in his 1928 film The Honeymoon, The Wedding March from 1928, and Walking Down Broadway. In the 1930s, Pitts teamed up with Thelma Todd, and they were a 1930s movie comedy duo. Assembled by Hal Roach as the female counterparts to Laurel and Hardy, the duo's members changed over the years and included actresses Patsy Kelly, Pert Kelton, and Lita Roberti. ZaSu was critically well received in several serious roles, including von Stroheim's The Wedding March, yet in between she became familiar to moviegoers as a comedienne, so when she appeared as Lou Ayres' dying mother in All Quiet on the Western Front in 1930, the audience at the first preview started to laugh as soon as she came on screen. You can learn more about Lou Ayres in my video on Ginger Rogers. ZaSu's voice was fluttery and high-pitched, and she would become the inspiration for Olive Oyl from Popeye. Pitts took all of this in stride. Her heart-wrenching speech in All Quiet on the Western Front could not be heard over the laughter, and it was clear ZaSu was so identified with comedic roles the scene would have to be reshot with another actress. After spending several years as one of the earliest residents of the Hollywood Studio Club, ZaSu married the sportsman and promoter Tom Gallery in 1920. Gallery appeared in 21 films over 7 years. Pitts gave birth to their daughter Anne, who she raised alongside Dawn, formerly Marvin, the child the actress Barbara La Marr asked ZaSu to adopt before she died in 1926. You can learn more about this child's paternity in my video on Barbara La Marr. In 1933, after 13 years of marriage, ZaSu divorced Gallery and married John Eddie Woodhall, a handsome former tennis player 7 years her junior. In 1944, her ex-husband Gallery ran the day-to-day operations of the Brooklyn Tigers, while its owner was serving in the military. Pitts and her second husband, Woodhall, would stay married until her death, and from all accounts she adored him, although her friends did not agree. As Frances Marion wrote, "We all felt strongly anti-Eddie until finally we realized that while ZaSu had worked so hard for 30 years, keeping him in gambling money, she really loved him, and if anyone even slighted him, she was upset. I'll never forget what Eulalia, another friend, said mildly at a time when ZaSu was hard-pressed for money, 'Can't Eddie get a regular job?' Finances were often an issue, but together they managed to buy a beautiful Paul Williams-designed house in 1936 at 241 North Rockingham Road in Brentwood, California. I believe this house still stands. Frances Marion, who stayed close to ZaSu over the years, was always on the lookout for parts in her films she could play, such as the role of Gert in Blondie of the Follies, starring Marion Davies. ZaSu managed to work fairly regularly, including radio work when she was often a ditzy dame character, and grew into a familiar and beloved character actress. She moved into performing in live television in the 1950s and was introduced to a new generation by playing Ann Sothern's Aunt Martha in one of TV's first situation comedies, Private Secretary, which ran from 1953 to 1957, and then as Gail Storm's sidekick in the situation comedy Oh, Susanna from 1956 to 1960. In the early 1960s, she was a frequent guest star on established programs such as The Jim Backus Show, Perry Mason, and Burke's Law, and her final big screen appearance was in It's a Mad, 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 Mad World in 1963. She also appeared with a young Elizabeth Taylor and William Powell in the film Life with Father. As we all know, Elizabeth Taylor was pushed as the next big thing after Marilyn Monroe was struggling, and you can learn more about Marilyn Monroe in the videos on my channel. In the last few years of her life, she became very political, raging against California Governor Pat Brown for his handling of civil rights and UAW chair and unionist Walter Reuther. Her friend, the screenwriter and journalist DeWitt Bodine, described Pitts as to the far right of the late John Wayne. She got up to make a speech, and soon even the Republicans were booing her. Newspaper columnists slapped her down in their columns, but she quickly and quietly withdrew from the public scene, realizing that electioneering was not for her. Pitts knew globalism when she saw it, perhaps remembering the faces of the men that came to her mother's boarding house in Santa Cruz, and how work on the Llewellyn steel mills and San Francisco ports dried up in the 1960s and 1970s. It was almost as if she had become an over-the-top character that would have been too much on the screen, let alone in real life. She was stricken with cancer for several years, but pretended to her friends and family that she recovered. She always devoted more of herself to others than to herself, so this was in character for her. Frances Marion wrote to actress Gloria Swanson, and you can learn more about Swanson's friend Beatrice LaPlante on my channel, who asked Frances Marion to forward a sympathy note to ZaSu's daughter Anne. Swanson recounted her experience with ZaSu's final year. I hadn't seen ZaSu in 2 or 3 months, but we talked often over the telephone. Poor darling, she was so hopeful and convinced that she was entirely cured. But our mutual friend, Dr. Terwilliger, told me that while the Pasadena doctor, the nutritionist Dr. Beeler, truly a great man, he was not a miracle worker, and Dr. T was worried because ZaSu took such little care of herself. Her eagerness to make money for her husband, Eddie, drove her to destructive lengths, such as only a few weeks before she died, she motored herself to Phoenix and did the play Everybody Loves Opal for a week. An old friend, Mrs. Loyal Davis, the wife of the famous brain surgeon in Chicago, and Colleen Moore were both there and went to the opening performance. Edith Davis was an actress when she married her second husband, Loyal Davis, and was already the mother of her daughter, Nancy, who would become an actress and then marry Ronald Reagan. The two women were shocked at the way she looked, and when Mrs. Davis found she was staying in a motel, she picked her up, bag and baggage, and brought her to her own beautiful home in Phoenix. There she received fresh food and loving care, but Mrs. Davis said it was unbelievable the torture ZaSu went through to gather enough strength in order to continue in the play with 2 matinees and several performances. Then she drove back, and about 2 weeks before she died, she flew to Canada to do the play for a week for about $750. This, of course, sealed her doom. Towards the last, she was in agony, and Eddie carried on in true dramatic style. His friends said he's heartbroken losing her. Her friends said he's heartbroken losing his meal ticket. Thus the Civil War raged on. Now the poor old boy will have to get a job in the real estate business. Like all mothers, ZaSu managed to keep from Anne not only how seriously ill she was, but how intensely she was suffering. So naturally she was stunned when death came so suddenly. But she has the comfort of a very fine, loving husband and those 2 wonderful children. I was almost as bad as Anne because ZaSu had me practically convinced that there was no longer any sign of the cancer in her body. In the Western story, which I just finished and which will be produced as a movie, I hope I had written the most wonderful comedy role for her that she has had in years. To amuse her, I used to read scenes to her over the phone, and even when her laughter sometimes ended in a cough, I persuaded myself that the cough was only the tail end of a cold which she assured me she was getting over. ZaSu died on June 7, 1963, at the age of 69. Many of her obituaries reported her age incorrectly since she moved her birth date from 1894 to 1900 when she married the younger Woodall. Following a Catholic Mass, she was buried at Holy Cross in Los Angeles. The husband ZaSu worked so hard to support managed somehow, I think as a real estate agent, as he lived another 20 plus years, passing away in 1988 at the age of 87 and is also buried at Holy Cross. Gallery, her first husband, outlived them both and died in 1993. The boxing matchmaker and TV program promoter married Lillian Fett in 1933, the same year he divorced Pitts, or he married her in 1939, it's not clear, and appears to have had 2 more children. The fact that his career was fading while his wife's was still going strong caused problems with his marriage to Pitts. The ZaSu Pitts Memorial Orchestra was formed in San Francisco by Stephen Ashman, a bass player. They released several LPs from 1984 to 1987 and continue to be active. The orchestra does not have any overt connection to ZaSu Pitts beyond the name, but it's great to see her recognized. I will end this video with a 1996 interview between ZaSu's adopted son, Don Gallery, who was Barbara La Marr's biological son. Born July 28, 1922, he was the natural-born son of silent film superstar and world-renowned beauty Barbara La Marr. In the Roaring Twenties, a single parent having and raising a child was frowned upon, and the too beautiful girl, La Marr, could have found herself devoid of a Hollywood career. Determined to keep her child, Barbara arranged for her baby, Don, to be housed in the famous Hope College in Dallas, Texas, where she adopted him on one of her personal appearance tours. She named him Marvin Carville La Marr and soon married action thriller actor Jack Dougherty. All three lived in a beautiful storybook home in the lovely Whitley Heights section of Hollywood, which you can learn more about on my channel, which was considered the first Beverly Hills of Los Angeles. Little Sonny was adored by his mother, but soon tragedy entered their blissful lives. Barbara La Marr began having health problems exacerbated by her alcoholism. Foreseeing her own premature death, she arranged for her son to be taken care of by her close friend and movie co-star ZaSu Pitts. Barbara La Marr gave her friend ZaSu a large sum of cold cash to endow and ensure the son's future. She passed away in 1926. She wisely knew that the kind-hearted, dependable, and stable ZaSu and her wonderful husband, Tom Gallery, would make a perfect family for her son. Not only would Sonny have two fantastic parents, but he would also have a sister, Anne Gallery. He was legally adopted by Tom and ZaSu and was raised knowing his birth mother. He was very happy with his newfound family. He lived an incredible life of privilege and fame, growing up in the golden age of Hollywood, surrounded by film superstars and their families. ZaSu Pitts' house at 241 North Rockingham Drive was known for its warmth and hospitality. At one time or another, his famous neighbors included Greta Garbo, Clark Gable, Elizabeth Taylor, Shirley Temple, Claudette Colbert, and Joan Crawford. An interview with Don Gallery. Do you think that Barbara La Marr was your mother? Well, of course I don't remember, but yes, I do. I was even born on her birthday, July 28th. When I was small, I was a spunky lad, and ZaSu Pitts, my beloved adopted mother, used to say, I told other kids, your mother was stuck with you, but my mother got to choose me. Do you have any memory of the beautiful Barbara La Marr? Unfortunately, no. I was such a small child at the time of her tragic death. Mama, ZaSu, told me that we loved each other very much and that Barbara was a wonderful mother. Barbara La Marr's last wishes were that I would always be taken care of by ZaSu Pitts because she was such a very good woman. Could you tell me a little bit about your schooling? I went to the Webb School, a very well thought of and prestigious private school. All my classmates were the children of movie stars, very wealthy parents, or famous folks such as writers, directors, producers, and that sort of thing. We also had classes on Catalina Island, which I loved and where I now live. When I was real young, I thought everyone was brought up like me. I was a lucky young man. You had a strong connection with Paul Byrne. Can you please elaborate on this relationship? Well, I won't tell you everything because I'm saving that for the book you're helping my dear friend Margaret Burke write about Barbara La Marr. But he was my godfather, and he was deeply in love with Barbara La Marr. Many said that Barbara was the great love of his life. She didn't feel the same about him romantically, but she was very fond of him. From Barbara's death until the early 1930s, Paul Byrne used to come over to ZaSu Pitts' house on Sunday afternoons. A lot of the time he came with movie actor Bruce Cabot, who was such a nice guy. Mr. Byrne used to bring me wonderful gifts. I especially remember a battery-operated boat that was about 3 feet long. I used to play with it in the swimming pool. I loved that boat. Could you tell me a little about Jean Harlow, Byrne's wife? I really liked Jean Harlow. She was so sweet and such a lovable person. She used to smile a lot and was very, very nice to me. She really loved children. She came over a lot with Paul Byrne, and he was crazy about her, like we all were. Everyone loved Jean. She was very beautiful, but I was just a child and didn't realize how glamorous she was and what a catch she was. When I was at Webb School, located at Claremont and Catalina, I used to see Jean about once a month for a few years. She was a beautiful and kind-hearted person. I will always miss her. Was there any movie star that you did not like? Yes, but only one. None of the kids liked her. Her name was Gloria Swanson. She was aloof and kind of mean. I was scared of her, and my sister Anne and I tried to stay out of her way. I was under the impression she didn't have time for children, and she was very aware of her stardom and acted in a very grand manner. She would give mean looks with her big blue eyes. I remember watching the film Sunset Boulevard in 1950 and thinking, that's her. She's really like that Norma Desmond. Who were some of your favorite neighbors? Claudette Colbert lived next door with her husband, Dr. Joel Pressman. She was sweet and friendly and a good neighbor. She was energetic and pretty and always seemed happy. Many famous people used to come and see her, like Marlene Dietrich. I also liked actor Alan Jones and his musical star wife, Irene Hervey. Could you tell me about Greta Garbo? With pleasure. When Claudette Colbert moved out, Greta Garbo moved in. She was really beautiful. I mean, really beautiful. This may come as a surprise to some people, but she was very nice and friendly. I liked her a lot, but her Swedish accent was so thick I had trouble understanding her. She was very kind to my sister Anne and me. She always smiled and waved to us, and she let us use her tennis court. Garbo used to laugh and talk to us through this metal fence that separated our yard from hers. It had cypress trees and vines growing up it, and I can still hear her voice and see her gorgeous face. During her stay as our next-door neighbor, I used to see her naked a lot by her swimming pool and lounging around sunning and swimming. My bedroom window overlooked her swimming pool. I told people about her nudity, and it was printed in some of the movie magazines and gossip columns of the day. But Garbo didn't care. She was always nice and friendly and childlike with me and my sister Anne. I also understand Clark Gable was a North Rockingham Drive resident. Could you share some memories of him? Yes, indeed. Mr. Gable was a fine man and a hell of an actor. Everyone liked him and his films. He resided across the street and was always very present. Mama, ZaSu, owned 2 very rare electric automobiles from 1903 and 1906. They were very beautiful and unusual. I remember they had leather fenders. Anyway, Mr. Gable always pestered Mama and tried to purchase them from her, but she would not sell them to Clark. I wonder what happened to those beautiful antique cars. They would be worth a fortune today. Could you tell me about Shirley Temple? I have always adored Shirley and still do today. Not only was she a great box office movie star, but she did many wonderful things for our government and our country, serving as an ambassador. She is a great lady. Shirley was my next-door neighbor. She lived on the other side, not with Claudette Colbert or Greta Garbo. We were always very close. I loved her family, and they loved and trusted me. I used to take Shirley to movie premieres, and we used to go out and have a lot of fun at parties, the beach, skating. We were not a romantic couple, but we had many friendly dates, and I was like the boy next door. That rascal Shirley Temple still has my Stanford University varsity jacket to this very day. She is a wonderful person, and I have many fond memories of her. By the way, she really was a talented little actress, don't you think? Yes, the most talented child actress ever, in my opinion. What about your memories of another star, Elizabeth Taylor? Elizabeth Taylor was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. Our paths crossed very early on. In 1937 or 1938, ZaSu was making a film in England. She stayed with Elizabeth Taylor's family. They all became very, very close. I was going to have a European vacation and visit Egypt and Palestine, and a day before I was to leave and start my journey, Mother phoned from Howard and Frances and Elizabeth's home and said not come over. I'm coming back home to America. A war has started in Europe. Well, that changed all of our lives. Anyway, later on, the Taylors came over to America, and Mr. Taylor set up his art gallery in Beverly Hills. The Taylors also moved into Shirley Temple's old house next door, so now Elizabeth Taylor was my next-door neighbor. I liked her and her brother Howard, and the Taylors were fond of me. They also trusted me, and even though I was 9 years older than Elizabeth, I used to escort her to parties when she was just 13 and play cards with her. I guess she had a crush on me, but we also talked a lot about movies, friends, problems. I really liked her. She was sweet and intelligent and loved animals. I used to take her to Sergi's Tropics in Beverly Hills, which was a popular hangout. We also went to USC frat house parties, again when she was just 13, and we played bridge at many fine homes. We used to go to Marjorie Armstrong's and play cards, or to Mr. and Mrs. McGill's in Malibu. McGill's owned the Marblehead Land Company in Malibu, and they were world-renowned for making beautiful tiles in America. Like I said before, Elizabeth Taylor at 13, 14, 15 was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. She had gorgeous blue-violet eyes fringed with dark natural lashes that many old-timers used to compare to my mother, Barbara La Marr. Her face was gorgeous and she had beautiful skin. Like Ava Gardner, she was completely lovely and had a tiny waist. She loved to show off. She had all her clothes specially made for her by a company called Lands, and they consisted of peasant blouses and full skirts cinched in at the waist. She was a fine young lady and I enjoyed her company very much. We did not drink or smoke, but we had a great time together. My relationship with her, I was older than her, and I could take her places with her parents' approval, and we would have fun. When she moved to Beverly Hills, we would sit in her family's kitchen and talk by the hour. Mama, ZaSu, made a film with her in 1948, The Delightful Life with Father. Could you tell me about a couple of other big movie stars that might be of interest to our readers? How about Barbara Stanwyck and Joan Crawford? Wow, yes sir, stars don't come bigger than that. Well, when I was real young, Barbara Stanwyck and her husband, Frank Fay, lived down the street from me. Barbara was very popular, on screen and off. I had a big crush on her when I was 13 or so. Her voice just did me in. She had the damnedest voice. I remember getting up the nerve and going to her house one day and knocking on her door and asking her to come out on her porch to visit. She was very friendly and talked to me. I'm sure Miss Stanwyck knew I had a crush on her because Mama, ZaSu, knew, and Mama told everyone everything. I also liked Joan Crawford very much. She was very friendly and sociable. I knew she admired Barbara La Marr and that they were friends, as well as Paul Byrne. ZaSu also made a film with her, Pretty Ladies, in 1925, and liked her very much. None of us ever heard anything about child abuse and Mommy Dearest and drinking and all of that. Christina and Christopher, her adopted kids, were a lot younger than me, but I knew them in the 1940s and early 1950s, and I never heard anything bad about Joan Crawford in those days. She was always kind to me, and I always liked her. I remember her house and grounds and pool were beautiful and immaculate. I am a great admirer of Mary Astor. I have heard you mention her before. Mary Astor was a great actress and beauty. She was also a pianist and a lovely writer, very lovely and versatile. I think she was wonderful. She lived somewhere in the neighborhood. On Sundays, I would go to the Uplifters polo field off Sunset Boulevard in Brentwood. She was there every Sunday, watching the polo matches, maybe thinking about her one love, John Barrymore. She had a box next to ours. She was always beautiful, well-dressed, and very pleasant. ZaSu always said she was very intelligent. I had a crush on her, so I was afraid to go up and talk to her much. I remember she had this beautiful profile and looked regal, but she was warm and sexy. I thought Mary Astor was tops. Who of interest in your age group did you hang out with? Well, I adored Shirley Temple, but she was a few years younger than me. Jackie Cooper was real nice, so was Jane Withers. She had a great personality and loved to have parties. Judy Garland was there a lot. I liked Robert Stack, and we used to hang out. He was a good guy and a lot of fun. I knew some members of the Doheny family from school, and I used to go to their mansion, Greystone, to parties and gatherings. That was really a wonderful place. One of my best friends and the sweetest gal around was Leatrice Gilbert. She was and is a fantastic human being. Her famous father, John Gilbert, was a huge star in silent pictures, and he made 2 films with Barbara La Marr, Arabian Love in 1922 and St. Elmo in 1923. Leatrice's mother was also film actress Leatrice Joy, who was a marvelous and delightful woman. Everyone loved the 2 Leatrices. I also liked Harold Lloyd's 2 girls, Peggy and Gloria Lloyd. They were fun and sweet and lived in a beautiful mansion. Peggy and Gloria's mother was famous as Mildred Davis before she married Harold Lloyd. This interview is from 1996 and shows the impact that ZaSu Pitts' kindness had on Hollywood and the world in general.